New political parties being formed. Will they last? Will they make sense? Will they add to the landscape? Let's find out this morning inside your Spotlight on Now.
Now, the Progressive Democratic Patriots officially launched the party in Trinidad on May 1st, and political leader of the party, Watson Duke, has announced a host of promises to encourage citizens to vote for the new party. Now, to discuss with me the party's chances at the polls and what are their chances in the long run is Professor Dr. Hamid Ghany. Professor Ghany, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, Professor, based on what you've seen thus far, in terms of them, opening the office and, Watson Duke saying that he wants to be somebody on the ground, do you think that's going to be enough to sway votes come at the end of the year for local government elections?
I think that the PDP is engaging in a wider strategy of a kind of federal approach to the politics, whereas the Tobago operation is not going to be involved with the Trinidad operation. And therefore, what he has opened up, he has a deputy political leader in Tobago who is the chief secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, and that's the Tobago operation. He has some deputy political leaders who've been brought on board. Here, they're going to be confined to the Trinidad operation, from what I can see, and that they are going essentially to try to target a number of areas that, from what I can see, initially are PNM strongholds, because Watson Duke announced Lavender, here I come, and so on, that kind of line. And I'm sensing that he's trying to work his way into a number of areas in Trinidad, and I rather suspect that the local government elections will provide for him a testing ground as regards what their strengths are. And if they can get into any of these councils. Now, of course, the local government election is very different to the general election in that the local government election is a mixture of both first past the post and proportional representation. So that you have your traditional electoral districts, which are all done on first past the post. But then in the entire corporation, at the end of the election, you tally up all the votes cast for all the candidates in the districts, and you allocate in proportion to votes cast the 4 positions of aldermen in all of the councils. So it is quite possible to win 0 seats in a regional corporation, but still get an alderman seat because you got more than 25% of the votes cast, because there are 4 seats. If you get 25% of the votes cast, you can get 1 seat. If you get 50%, you can get 2 seats. And that's how it goes. So that I think that he's going to want to test his strength, and local government elections gives him the first shot at testing his strength.
Now, Professor Ghany, as you mentioned, testing his strength. I know he was very vocal about contesting the Port of Spain Corporation. What do you think his chances are there?
Well, the Port of Spain Corporation has traditionally been a PNM corporation. But one of the things about it is that there's traditionally been a low voter turnout, so that there really hasn't been much of a challenge to the PNM. You had, it would have been in the 2010 local government election that you would have had some seats going to the People's Partnership. They got some seats there. Back in 1983 in the local government elections, the ONR had an effect, and there was an arrangement, an alliance arrangement, and some seats were won in the Port of Spain Corporation that did not go to the PNM. Other than that, it has been a clean sweep for the PNM in the Port of Spain Corporation. So it will be very interesting to see what he is going to do, what his fortunes will be like in terms of the Port of Spain Corporation, because that has been dominated by the PNM for years and years and years, and it is, to a large extent, it is very strong PNM territory.
Right. Now, the 2 major parties would have lost some ground in 2019. Do you think that the PDP is going to capitalize on the voters who didn't turn out at that point in time?
Well, one of the things I suspect that the PDP and some of these other parties are trying to target is the low voter turnout in a number of areas. And I think that to create the excitement to get people to come out to vote, is part of what the strategy is. In terms of fracturing PNM support in PNM areas, that is going to be a bit of a steep hill to climb, and there's going to have to be very, very deep disenchantment for that to take place. I mean, at the lowest point of the PNM's situation in the 1986 general election, when the NAR won 33-3, was that, Port of Spain East, as it was designated at that time, Lavender, as it was designated at that time, they were boundary to each other. Those two survived the NAR onslaught with reduced majorities and were still won by the PNM. And San Fernando East was the third one that survived the onslaught of the NAR and was still held by the PNM. So that if you use that data and you shake it right down, one can see that the Port of Spain area, the Port of Spain Lavender area, that boundary to each other, that is the hardest core of PNM support. And therefore, he is going into an area that is going to be very interesting for those of us who observe these things to see how he will perform.
Now, Professor Ghany, while Trinidad and Tobago is one island, one country, I believe that the style of politics, one can argue that the style of politics are different depending on the island. I mean, PDP can be seen as a new party. Will that hurt or help their chances as they look forward to the local elections and even 2025?
Well, I think that the PDP is a homegrown Tobago party to start with. And it was born out of a Tobago struggle with regard to trying to challenge the PNM. So it emerged in 2017 and won a couple of seats in the Tobago House of Assembly election of that year and lost another one by about 5 votes. So that they clearly demonstrated that they were an emerging force. And then by 2021, they had become a major force because they forced a 6-6 tie with the PNM in January of 2021. And then by December of 2021, it had turned into a 14-1 landslide against the PNM. So that they clearly have quite strong roots in Tobago. And the issues in Tobago, in many respects, will be very different to the issues being articulated in Trinidad. However, the political strategy appears to be to make inroads in Trinidad. The long-range goal also is that the PDP would like to see internal self-government for Tobago. That's a very fundamental issue on their agenda. And depending on parties in Trinidad that have majorities to be able to deliver the mandate of internal self-government for Tobago, I rather suspect that if they come to Trinidad and they do well, then they can influence the outcome of that political agenda. Because in the last THA election, there was a gap between what the PNM were offering for internal self-government and what the PDP would have liked to have seen. And I think that in Tobago, a lot of people felt that the offer from the government had come up short and that they wanted to see more. So I'm sensing that Watson Duke has a very interesting strategy in front of him, and he's also engaging some of the tactics that were used in Tobago. I see that some of the same tactics are being used here about the loaves of bread and communities and providing assistance to needy persons and so on, which is perhaps a different type of campaigning. And it's not the old-time rum and roti politics that people have written about and talked about in Trinidad and Tobago. So that it will be interesting to see how he's going to engage. But his first point of engagement is in the Lavender Port of Spain area, which is a very interesting move on his part.
But Professor Ghany, as we mentioned, the Lavender area, I mean, he's basically going into a community that he doesn't really know. It's kind of strange to him. So, I mean, how will that fare for him at the polls?
Well, this is where the test is going to come, because what is happening is that there are 7 constituencies west of Barataria, San Juan. Lavender East Morvan, Lavender West, Port of Spain South, Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, Diego Martin Northeast, Diego Martin Central, Diego Martin West. All 7 of those have been won by the PNM consistently over a period of time with low voter turnout. and the voter turnout has been less than 50% in these areas, and the PNM has won them. So that I don't know if part of the strategy is to try to go after some of these areas because the turnout has been in the 40% range, which means that a lot of people are staying at home and they're not participating. So I'm getting a sense that he might be going after trying to energize those who are not participating and seeing the extent to which he can crack some of the support that the PNM has. That is a very hard nut to crack, and historically that has been shown to be so. So the interest in this would be to see what would happen in terms of getting that element that does not turn out to vote. Who are these voters? Where are they located? And are they likely to want to vote for a new party that is offering something in the political arena? So I think that the electoral success is something that would come from the extent to which people will resonate with his message. If his message gets through and he's able to entice people to come to the polls to vote.
Now, Professor Ghany, I read your article. I want to switch gears a bit in terms of investment opportunities. Now, you said the funding of third parties outside of the two major parties will provide a full slate of candidates and create five-way contests. That will provide an advantage to PNM in many constituencies, while the UNC can also benefit. How so?
Well, to a large extent, you see, the main parties have their core base of support. So that if it is that there are parties opposed to the main parties, what will happen is that the division of that vote that is opposed to the main parties under the first past the post system can cause some parties to win constituencies with reduced majorities. And it is perhaps most widely seen in marginal constituencies. So that if one looks at some of the marginal constituencies from the 2007 general election, where the Congress of the People was able to substantially make inroads into the UNC voter base, that left the PNM with a hardcore of votes that was able to win, and win with less than 50% of the votes cast in a constituency. So in places like Barataria, San Juan, and St. Joseph, and Princeton South Tableland, which is what it was called at that time, you were able to see that in Pointe-a-Pierre also, you were able to see that the PNM were able to win those seats by getting 42%, 44%, 43% of the votes cast, whereas the Congress of the People and the UNC, also in Chaguanas East, was splitting each other's votes. So that if it was a straight fight between the PNM and one of those two parties, you may have had a different outcome. So by 2010, this strategy was refined, and the UNC and the COP had an arrangement whereby they were not going to contest against each other, and you had a completely different outcome in 2010. So when you look at 2007 data, where they were fighting each other in a three-way fight that created a split vote and allowed the PNM to win more seats than they got votes, in terms of winning 26-15 in that, but they were getting less than 50% of the votes overall. It is a matter of political strategy that when you have these parties contesting against each other, you're going to split the votes. And that is not very helpful to their fortunes, those who want to remove the PNM from power. So that it is easier for the third parties to be able to come onto the scene, make their case, and split the votes, and you get someone else winning the seat with less than 50% of the votes. It's one of the features of the first past the post system that has remained with us. It is something that has formed part of our political culture. And it is only when you get that unification, such as 1986 with the NAR, such as 2010 with the People's Partnership, you can get a completely different outcome. The question is, how long can these parties, when they come together against the PNM, survive? And that we saw there was a fracture in terms of the NAR, the 1986-91 NAR, and there was also a fracture with the People's Partnership in the 2010-2015 period, which substantially weakens them by the time they come to the next election after that. So yes. So
Professor Ghany, we only have a few more minutes, but I just wanted to get this final question in. Do you think the strategies that the PDP is employing now will build enough momentum for general elections when it rolls around in 2025?
Well, they have enough time if they're going to build any strategies, and they will have the opportunity to test their feedback from the polls, the local government elections, which are due between December this year and March next year, within a 90-day window, so that they have time on their side to start doing the work. And it's a lot of work that has to be done on the ground. And the major parties are very quiet. The PNM and the UNC are not saying anything. They're obviously observing, taking in what is going on. And I think what these parties have to observe is if they start sniping at each other, you have the PDP, the PEP, and then you have the NTA. If they start sniping at each other, that's exactly what the major parties would want, that they start taking pot shots at each other. And of course, they would want that they all contest individually, as opposed to having some kind of alliance or coalition or partnership arrangement, which would create a completely different political dynamic.
Professor Ghany, always a pleasure to have you in, just to pick your brain a little bit so we can understand exactly what's happening with these third parties, of course, as we look forward to both elections. So thank you so much for joining us, as always, on Now.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Professor Ghany just giving us some insight into how important, or how, the chances of the PDP at the elections. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. We have so much more. Stay with us.